Today we're going to be having a look at, can religious items, in particular things like the scapular, help us during the 3 days of darkness? We're going to be having a look at a personal testimony of a catastrophic fire in which someone nearly lost their homestead. But it seems that the protection of the scapular prevented the fire. Do join us for this talk.
And we found that right along our entire fence line, the fire hadn't gone any further than the fence. It stopped at the boundary the whole way through. No, there were trees that burnt halfway through and then stopped. It's almost like Moses burning bush.
Welcome to our channel. This is for those who are disappointed, shall we say, in the continuous series of scandals that we see coming from within the church. So let us take a moment to head upstream to the pure sources of the great saints. Do join us on this journey. Good morning, Bernadette Tuffin. Welcome to our channel. And you're going to be speaking to us about the protection of sacramentals and prayer from your experience. So you had a massive wildfire on the farm a while back. You're going to be telling us about that.
Yes. Well, good morning, Edward, and thank you very much for having me on your channel.
Great, thank you. Just tell us a bit about yourself, who you work for and the organization.
Right, so I work for a Catholic non-profit organization called South Africa Needs Our Lady. It focuses primarily on the message of Fatima and particularly Our Lady's requests for the daily rosary, first 5 Saturdays devotion, conversion of sinners and amendment of life. We organize rosary rallies at least once a year throughout South Africa, and last year we had over 1,000 groups praying the rosary, particularly for our country in this trying day and age. Yeah,
and our country definitely needs prayer.
Oh yes, it does. So yes, we also do mailings to many people throughout South Africa.
Yeah.
So yes, at the time of the fire, we were actually in the very middle of doing a mailing on the Book of Confidence, which was quite an appropriate topic also considering the situation. So yes.
So maybe the devil was getting involved there to try and prevent that campaign.
We definitely felt that, yes.
My understanding, your organization, Family Action South Africa, is the equivalent in a way of LifeSite News.
It has quite a widespread here in South Africa. The objectives are obviously slightly different because they are a more news-based organization, whereas we are more religious-oriented in the sense of Catholic and focusing on Our Lady of Fatima's message. However, we work closely with them, and they have featured the rosary rallies in South Africa on their page before, and we support each other in a big way.
Right.
I also worked for John Henry Weston as his executive assistant for several years and was very impressed with the internal operations of the organization, and I highly recommend them if you're looking for a good, reliable Catholic news source.
Now, can you tell us about this fire which happened on your farm?
Absolutely. So it was late in January, and it obviously my parents and my siblings live on a farm in the Little Karoo. And it's very dry in the middle of January. It's high summer by us. And the neighbor's worker had been making a fire to burn some old bushes or whatever, and had somehow left it unattended. And then later in the afternoon, it flared up, and the wind picked up enormously, and it started rushing towards the mountain and towards our farm, which is where, our farm is at the foot of the mountain.
Right.
So it was quite intimidating. I also happened to be the only one on the farm at that point in time with my baby brother, who was about 8 years old at the time. And neither of us actually knew anything about what was supposed to happen in the way of how to put on pumps, how to move the tractor. And yes, there were several things that combined at that particular point in time to make it even more dramatic and scary, because our phones weren't working for some reason, so I couldn't call for help. So we couldn't put the pumps on, we couldn't put any kind of water on to protect the farm,
right.
And the cottages are quite close to the border. So it was highly stressful.
So you saw this fire rushing towards you and you couldn't do anything about it? You couldn't put the water on, you couldn't put the sprayers on, and you knew something was going to happen?
Yes, no, I was convinced that we were actually going to lose all the cottages and the main house, which is a little higher up the mountain.
Right.
But given the wind direction, I was convinced that we would at least lose one of them.
That would have been your entire organization would have been at stake as well. Family Action.
At that time, the organization was actually being run from our home base. So yes, that would have been catastrophic. And we were busy, like I said earlier, packing a 4,000-piece Book of Confidence mailing.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So that could have been lost as well at the same time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And then tell us what happened as the fire really approached.
So as the fire approached, the fire engine also couldn't get through because there was so much smoke that they didn't know where the fire was. So they weren't able to get through to us. However, we did have a neighbor with us, a non-Catholic neighbor, who, when he saw the situation and saw how stressed I was, he said, "Let us just pray for a moment." And he called on the angels to protect the farm. And we prayed a memorare, asking Our Lady to assist as well. And then he said, I think you should go to our neighbors. So we did that, my little brother and I left my personal brown scapular on the door of our main house, because I'd read recently that, other people in that situation had fires. They left their scapulars on the door, and the house was protected while everything else around them burnt down. So I left my scapular there. I gave my baby brother the big laptop, which contained all the vital information for the organization. And I myself took a big 1.2 meter statue of Our Lady of Fatima along with us. I couldn't leave Our Lady. Right. And we proceeded to trek to our neighbors, which was about at least 500 meters to a kilometer's walk away.
With the bushfire all around?
It was
approaching,
heading towards us, yes. Yes.
When you got to your neighbors, you looked back?
I looked back at that point, and it really looked like the cottage closest to the main house was going up in smoke. And I was absolutely convinced that our main house was also going to go up in smoke because it's right against the mountain.
It must have been a shock.
It was. I was on the phone to my mom, and I thought, that's it. We've just lost everything.
In tears.
Yeah, definitely. It was very stressful. Right. But yes, it was amazing, because in the aftermath, we actually went and looked at where the fire had burnt. Right. And we found that right along our entire fence line, the fire hadn't gone any further than the fence.
It stopped at the boundary.
It stopped at the boundary the whole way through, wow. Even past the one cottage, which I was sure that it was going to go up in flames. And nothing was touched.
And there was plenty of material to burn there.
Oh yes, no, there were trees that burnt halfway through and then stopped inexplicably.
Stopped in the middle of the tree.
It was almost like Moses burning bush. Yes, no, I'm convinced that the angels were protecting the farm, and absolutely there were bushes that are still there that you can see that have not half burnt.
I was there, I think, the week before, and I saw the fire was the bush was ready to burn. There were fires all around in the neighbouring area, and especially around the one house, it was thick bush.
Yes,
it was thick bush there,
and I think that
none of that burnt.
No, and it had been a very dry summer, so everything was tinderbox.
Yeah. Impressive.
It was. We're very, very grateful.
So the fire literally burned up to the boundary and cut off.
Yes.
And you couldn't even switch the water on. You couldn't get the sprayers working, any irrigation. So there's no explanation.
No. No, it was heavenly intervention.
Incredible, yeah.
And then the fire just burnt up past the farm and went up onto the mountain, where it continued to burn for 2 weeks.
Wow.
But it didn't touch any of our important assets or houses or anything.
So it literally burnt around your farm?
Yes.
And that was the brown scapular?
The brown scapular and the power of prayer. We actually had done a rosary campaign, though, shortly around the same time, which obviously, once again, the devil doesn't like sacramentals, and he certainly doesn't appreciate those who work for our Heavenly Mother. So we definitely felt that it was an attack as well.
Right. You have the purple scapular, which we've been talking about, on Marie Julie Joheny, that's her scapular, and the brown one is more the Carmelite scapular, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
From Our Lady of Carmel?
Our Lady of Mount
Another
Carmel
apparition?
and Saint Simon's Stock, I think it was.
Okay.
Yes.
And it's accompanying that is protection as well for the family and
Yes,
Right.
no, the Brown Scapular carries great graces, and it is a very powerful sacramental. Everyone should be wearing one of them. It also played it was an integral part of the Fatima apparitions as well, when at the Miracle of the Sun, there were several other apparitions that, other pictures that appeared in the sky, and one of them was of Our Lady holding the Rosary and the Brown Scapular. So it is one of the most powerful sacramentals we have in our spiritual armory.
Excellent. Well, that's fascinating, Bernadette. It's incredible. It's hard to believe. I mean, obviously we can't prove it this way or that way, but for a fire to burn up to the boundary and stop, that's unbelievable. It gives one shivers down the spine to hear that sort of thing. Thank you for helping us with this interview, and wishing you all the best with the organization, with the Rosary rallies in the future. And maybe also say that you're now engaged to be married. Announce that to the world.
Yes, I have. I'm engaged to be married in May to a really wonderful man, and once again, I believe that's the power of prayer as well.
Excellent. Excellent. So you prayed for a husband, for
Oh yes, Saint Anne and Saint Raphael, Saint Joseph. I owe them a big thank you.
excellent. Well, congratulations,
Thank you very much.
and thank you again. We'll see you next time.
Thank you very much for having me. God bless.